The island of New Guinea is the second largest in the world and home to the third largest tropical rainforest, home to a variety of charismatic and elusive tree kangaroo species and the endemic colorful birds of paradise. 80% of the island's primary forest cover still remains intact. It isn't just the most floralistically diverse region on the planet, but it is also home to roughly 1,000 or more languages across its two separate nations, Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. Local and indigenous populations on the island are often exploited by extractive industries such as the palm oil sector. Developers often take or convince locals to give up their land with the promise of jobs or infrastructure. In response to this form of land grabbing, alternate or additional income streams have emerged to provide locals with the autonomy to manage their own lands while providing for their families. In Papua New Guinea, one particular crop has shown massive potential to provide a whole new source of income for the nation.
And we introduced galip, and we have a strong galip industry that can export these particular nuts outside of Papua New Guinea, so we bring a lot more resources into the country. We will inevitably impact on the biodiversity of the region. That is a fact. Once we move to oil palm, I see us as cutting down more and more of our virgin forests and even our secondary forests.
I'm Mike DiGirolamo, your host for Mongabay Explores, an episodic podcast series from Mongabay.com's global team, where I speak with experts, scientists, and activists from the field working to protect our natural world. You're listening to episode 7 in our season featuring the island of New Guinea. Canarium indicum, otherwise known as the galip nut, is making waves as a promising new source of income for local farmers in Papua New Guinea, and for the past decade and a half, government-funded research has been conducted into the viability of this nut to improve people's livelihoods on the island. I spoke with Dr. Nora DeVoe of the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACR, who is the research program manager for ACR's project focused on enhancing private sector-led development for the Canarium industry throughout Papua New Guinea. We spoke about how this research has empowered women entrepreneurs in PNG and the lives of Papua New Guineans wanting to get involved in the industry. I also spoke with Dorothy Devine Luana, who is the entrepreneur behind DMS Organics. I spoke with her about her 9-year-old venture, how ACR's research and development has aided her work, how agroforestry works on her farms, and where she sees the Canarium industry heading next, and also what needs to be done to protect PNG biodiversity and the autonomy of locals.
My name is Nora DeVoe. I'm the Forestry Research Program Manager at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, or ACR. You probably know that that Australia has a special relationship with Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is the recipient of about 25% of ACR's research activity. We work across the agriculture sector there, including forestry and fisheries. Because we have a fairly broad array of projects there, we have become aware of a whole bunch of opportunities for people, including the Gallup Nut project, which incidentally wasn't a brainchild of ACR, was actually started by the National Agricultural Research Institute of Papua New Guinea. They predate us, working in Gallup Nut by maybe 5 or 6 years.
ACR's funding has gone and continues to go towards a variety of different kinds of research dedicated to uncovering how to harvest and process Gallup nuts, as well as providing training for those who want to get involved in the industry, giving them information and tools to grow and sell the crop, including business management training.
We fund research for development. So our funding is going first into research, and some of that is staff that the project supports at NARI, and some of it is Australian staff who do things like market research and food safety research. Some of the social research is done by Australians with Papua New Guinea counterparts. So those people are paid to do research, and some of them publish papers, and they're research scientists. We also provide training so that what we learn in the research part of the project can be shared and used by people. So we've trained people who are interested in processing the nuts and producing products from the nuts, and we provide ancillary training around that, so small business management type training. We're doing some trialing of different logistics, so we're financing trial transport to look at ways of trying to make the processing more efficient so that it becomes more profitable. We've done lots of research on the actual processing, so what's the best way to, for example, crack the nuts but keep the kernels intact, because a whole kernel is perceived as a more attractive as a snack item than pieces of the kernel. So those sorts of things, that's where our money goes, basically. Some of what I just described to you is supporting people who want to be involved in this business by sharing the information with them, providing the training. We've done some, for example, assistance with packaging. Some small entrepreneurs, how do they package the nuts to maintain the quality? And we've provided the actual packaging so that people can do some experiments and see how, would it be worth it for them to invest in that? Does it change the sales? That sort of hands-on research with producers.
The nut industry is huge globally, and internationally by 2025 will be worth an estimated $2 billion. Consumer interest in products made from nuts continues to increase, creating more demand. Nuts have a few advantages over other agricultural products, notably its ability to store for long periods without perishing. Galip nuts in particular have a substantial outer shell, protecting the fruit of the nut inside.
So a big advantage of a nut is that compared to many agricultural products, it's relatively imperishable. So you can harvest nuts and store them, and especially if you process them correctly, which is part of the research in our project with NARI, if you process them correctly, you can preserve their food values and store them for years. So that gives you a lot of advantages over, say, something like a papaya that you have to harvest within a very narrow window, and you have to treat very carefully because it's perishable and it only remains edible or desirable to eat for a relatively short period. A nut like Galip, that the outer nut has a fruit pulp, and then inside there's a shell. And that shell is what enables the storage because it protects the content, which is the edible part of the fruit.
Agroforestry, as you may know, is a form of sustainable agriculture or agroecology, which is based on traditional or indigenous knowledge. It often uses woody perennials, plants that last longer than 2 years, such as trees, which are planted alongside and in conjunction with other crops. These perennials usually yield a fruit like a chestnut, apples, or in this case, Galip nuts. It's a way for farmers to diversify their income streams by having another crop to sell when they are not harvesting the other. Along with the benefits that agroforestry brings to farmers' wallets, it also increases the nutrient profile of the soil itself, reduces erosion, and enhances carbon sequestration.
So the fact that the trees themselves have a fairly long fruiting period, several months, and it varies by which specific trees we're speaking about and where. But generally, they'll be in fruit almost 6 months of the year. So if you are a smallholder in Papua New Guinea and you have numerous crops that require your attention at different points, or you're juggling, as so many people are, you're juggling multiple activities to contribute to your livelihood, having something that allows you to be a bit opportunistic is a good fit with a farmer's, smallholder farmer's lifestyle, because it means that, I maybe can't do it this week, but next week I can get up there and harvest fruit from my trees.
And the nut can be stored for, well, a long time, making them easier to ship for processing.
That's a big advantage, and the storage properties of the nut are also a big advantage. It means that the nuts can be shipped to distant markets, which is part of the work in our project. We're doing a lot of our processing, first stage processing and collecting in East New Britain, but the big market has actually been in Port Moresby, so the nuts have to be able to travel. And the fact that they are encased in a hard shell means that they're pretty forgiving compared to, say, a mango or a papaya.
In PNG, galip nuts are a traditional and cultural centerpiece. Its familiarity, along with the nutrient and calorie-dense profile of the food, make it a prime choice for smallholder farmers to diversify their income. A smallholder farm is what's typically referred to as a non-commercial farm, usually run by a single family. Globally, around 2 billion people are supported by smallholder farms. In the East New Britain province of PNG, Phase 1 of ACR's project has already provided 1,000 smallholder farms with new markets for their galip nuts.
And you say, why this nut and why PNG? Well, the galip nut is there's actually a couple species that produce the nuts in the genus Canarium, but the one that we are working with is fairly widely distributed in the Pacific, but Papua New Guinea has a special relationship with galip. It's a traditional food that Papua New Guineans have used for centuries, that we can document thousands of years. So there's a traditional base in the society. People know the nut. They know how to harvest it. They often smoke it to preserve it. They know how to store it. It has a place in its cuisine. It's something that is, sometimes when you meet Papua New Guineans abroad, people are often homesick for traditional foods, and galip nut is something that they will mention as a food that, from home. It's a very nutritious food. It's high in minerals, and it's got a lot of calories and fats, protein. So it's quite a nutritious item, and again, people are familiar with it. So we didn't introduce the idea of working with galip nuts. This is something that's a property of Papua New Guinea. So it just posed an opportunity for people. What we've tried to do is develop processing techniques and explore expanding markets and assisting people who cultivate or collect nuts to have business options, just to expand the utility of the nut with people so that it provides another economic option for smallholders.
Because the nut is so plentiful in and around the forests and communities of PNG, access is easy, especially for smallholders, making it a convenient source of income.
It's sort of like people have galip nuts in their agroforests, and it's a native species that grows in the residual forest close to villages, and it's in less disturbed natural forests as well. So it's fairly widely distributed, so it's well known. So people have access to it, and it's just a resource that's in their environment that we've sort of marketized to an extent. So it means that if someone needs cash or wants cash for something, they can harvest nuts and they can sell those nuts.
With the National Agricultural Research Institute, NARI, ACR helped develop a processing facility for nuts in East New Britain. The farmers who are showing up the most are women. ACR's social research indicates that people are using the money for things such as healthcare expenses.
With NARI, we've developed a pilot processing facility at the NARI field station at Caravat, East New Britain. And we have lots of local people and some not so local people coming from a distance carrying galip nut and selling it at the factory and walking away with cash. And mostly it's women, actually. If you spend the day there and you look at who's coming during the nutting season, you see it's often women and kids. And, we've done some social research around who's selling the nuts and, what do they want the income for? What's the motivation? And it's quite interesting. Women say, I want to pay school fees, or I want something for my kid, or I need health care for someone in my family. So the trees are a bit like a piggy bank, and we're just trying to facilitate a cash source from the tree resource so that people have this additional string to their economic bow.
ACR has been involved in Canarium industry research and development for roughly 14 years. Nora says that in phase 1 of the project, much of the research was focused on the processing of galip nuts, the products that they can make, and the viability of them to generate an income.
So some of the preliminary research that was done in phase 1 was around the processing, like how long can you keep the nuts before the oils start to deteriorate, what products can you make from them. Our partner, Nari, now I think the Galip company has, there's several different products. So there are nuts that are roasted in their testa, which is the papery tissue that surrounds the kernel. We have an item where the testa is removed because some people don't like it, some people do like it. There's a caramelized nut, there's salted, unsalted, etc. So there's a variety of products. So some of that early work was done in phase 1, just asking the question, what is feasible? Is it feasible to profitably, because our hope is that this will leave the research domain and move wholly into a private sector commercial domain, and what will sustain it is if people can make money at it.
A crucial component of the equation here is the supply. How much galip nuts can PNG produce? A question that Nora says ACR is starting to answer in the current second phase of the project. And the answer has implications for tapping into the international demand for nut-based products, which, as mentioned earlier, has increased over the past decade.
One of the questions that, I'm a forester, so I tend to look at things from the point of view of the forest resource. One of the questions that was not asked early on that has kind of seems to me to be a very obvious first question is what is the supply basis? How much of this nut can Papua New Guinea produce? And we don't know that. We're just starting to investigate that now after all of this preliminary development. And you can see why that would be important if you wanted to scale up the endeavor and not just have small and medium enterprises, but potentially have someone, a commercial food processor who the country has aspirations around export, and there's a huge market. There's a huge international market for natural foods and for nuts in particular. So there's a real opportunity. But if you were going to make a pitch to an investor, for example, a logical question would be, well, how much of this stuff can you produce? Because there's an economy of scale in the processing. That's something that's happening now in this later phase. But phase 1 was really about feasibility and also to an extent about social organization.
Phase 1 also examined the social impacts that a boost in the Canarium industry would have on people's lives.
If we create an outlet for people to sell this, what are the implications in terms of, we're not trying to make extra work for women. We're trying to be helpful in terms of broadening an economic base. So there's you can see that there's an implication there. So there was some early social research around how will this fit into people's lives? How does it fit into the resources they have access to?
Research was also conducted on the domestication of the plant itself. They found that about 75% of nuts that are being harvested and brought to the Nari facility in East New Britain for processing come from the wild rather than from orchards.
And there are also some basic biological questions about the tree. When is it in fruit? What are the characteristics? Different strains of the species from different places have different properties, understanding some of that. There was some early work on domestication of the tree. So NARI, with some external support, established orchards, because a common thing in agriculture is to intensify production. We found that people do tend to, the nut that's being supplied to the processing facility is about 75% derived from wild germplasm. So the orchards are a useful adjunct, but they're not the main game.
The project's success in helping drive women-led entrepreneurship, Nora says, is evident in both individual and medium-sized enterprises, ranging from women producing and selling baked goods to businesses such as Dorothy Devine Luana's, which even outcompetes the brand name of this project, the Galip Nut Company.
So it is happening, and it's happening on a couple levels. One level is a very small, like women who've been trained by the project to produce baked goods based on Galip nuts that they then show up at the local market, or they put a stall, on the road outside their house, and they sell these products. So it's at a very, individual, low investment, opportunistic scale at that very small end. Then we've got people who are at a little bit bigger end, even a medium-sized enterprise, and you'll be speaking with Dorothy, and she'll tell you she's got a business, she employs people, she has regular circuits where she gets nuts, she's processing and selling, retailing in Port Moresby, and I don't know what her turnover is now, but she's been in the business for a while, and she's pretty established. In fact, she outcompetes the Galip Nut Company, which is the project's brand with NARI. So I would say she's a medium enterprise, and we've had other operators come into the market. Unfortunately, we lost someone who had a processing facility of some scale and an international market into Australia, but the man passed away. So that development is in hiatus now.
Dorothy started her company, DMS Organics, before meeting ACR and started using agroforestry, incorporating Galip nut trees as a way to bring more income into her community.
My name is Dorothy Devine Luana, and I am the business owner of what I call DMS Organics. And DMS Organics was really set up as a business to support my own people. So it really didn't start off as a for-profit business, but over time we realized that we needed to make profit. So the business was started by myself, largely because I was looking around me to see what was available in my environment. I saw how my people were living, and the fact that while we are naturally a very lush country and a very lush province, the price of all our raw products, whether it's cocoa, coffee, root crops, etc., is extremely low. So I was really looking for something that I could add value to bring a little bit more income into my community.
While Dorothy was not officially a part of ACR's program, they did provide research, consulting, and resources to her on an as-needed basis around her work, helping to build community awareness of the commercial value of Galip nuts. With this aid, Dorothy was able to train over 300 domestic farmers.
They would make available anyone who was in Papua New Guinea and in the province to come to my setup, have a look at what I've done, provide some technical comments, and so on and so forth. So that happened alongside some additional manpower resources to support me and my group with doing community awareness on the commercial value of the galip tree. We, through that process, managed to get around coaching, training, and mentoring over 300 domestic farmers.
Dorothy described her relationship with ACR as being voluntary, but centered around the shared goal of bolstering the Canarium industry in PNG.
Over time, when they would go on trips, say to another province in the islands region, they would ask me if I would like to go along with them. Most times I was more than happy to do it because it was exciting to be a part of a brand new industry for the country and for the province. In doing that, I had to actually look for a role for myself because everything was done on a voluntary basis with ACIAR. They didn't pay me any money. I didn't pay them any money, but we had a common objective, and that's what drove us to continue to me to work on my business, and secondly, to support them in terms of achieving the bigger objective, which was the development of the galip industry in Papua New Guinea.
Dorothy buys most of her galip nut seedlings from Neri and plants them with cocoa and coffee plants that are grown below the galip trees. From ACR, she learned best practices on how to store nuts.
Most of the galips on my farm are actually bought and transplanted from the research institute. We have an institute called the National Agriculture Research Institute. And those seedlings were brought from an island called Nissan Island, which is off the mainland island of Bougainville. If you look at your map, there's a very tiny, tiny island off there. Unfortunately, I planted about 400 trees. 400 trees that will eventually grow up to 30 meters in height. Some may be a bit higher. So being considerate of that, underneath the trees, we already have planted cocoa or cacao and some coffee. So those are the two main cash crops under which, which grow underneath the galip tree.
Dorothy's impact in her community could be fairly described as quite large. In addition to the laborers she employs, as a producer, she is also a buyer of galip nuts from other smallholder farms in PNG. She estimates that pretty much everyone who owns a galip tree has sold to her at one point, and she's paid roughly 1,000 different people, each person representing a different family. At her established buying point, she can start selling at 10 a.m. and sometimes finish as late as 8 p.m., spending up to 8,000 kina or 2,282 USD in one day.
I have 6 laborers on my farm, and those 6 laborers all have their own families of average of 5 people per person. They are mainly grass cutters. And also they pick the galip. They don't only do that off season, they are also harvesting cocoa and any other cash crops that I am producing. With galip in particular, my farm cannot sustain the business because I now have a marketing opportunity with a chain of supermarkets in Port Moresby. So we also set up buying points in our village where sometimes I would say maybe every single person that owns a tree comes and sells galip to us. I haven't done the statistics. I would comfortably say that maybe sometimes even 1,000 people are benefiting from my seasonal sale in terms of direct payments.
Dorothy wasn't always a buyer. First starting out as a farmer, she wanted to generate more income from the nuts that she farmed, so she became a processor, instead of selling her nuts to ACR's facility. Over time, she found she didn't have enough galip nuts to meet demand, and she started buying.
We decided as a family that we needed to get more money for our own product. So I decided to do some trials and process the product myself from my own farm. I put some on the ship, send it to the big city, Port Moresby, and we sold them. And so we did this ourselves and I found that we were getting more money from it, and our farmers were getting more money from it. So I decided not to sell to the factory, and I set up my own small business. I set up my own kitchen that is dedicated 100% to garlic. It took me about 1 year to build that kitchen and another year to sell cakes and cookies, to buy the ovens that I needed to do the drying. So in total, since I started to where I am now, in terms of harvesting, processing, and selling, it's taken me 9 years. In that 9 years, I went from being a farmer to a processor and found that I couldn't supply my customers enough. So I then decided to go to buying. So now that is why now I go and I buy garlic from the villages here in the peninsula.
As previously mentioned, DMS Organics outcompetes the Galip Nut Company, though Dorothy has a mutually beneficial relationship with them, sharing practices and techniques. Dorothy says what differentiates their products lies in the harvesting and roasting process. Dorothy produces what's called a fresh roast, while the Galip Nut Company sun-dries theirs. Much of the information on the practices that the two companies share is available to the public.
I work with them because I get my technology from them. I would say that maybe our end product is slightly different. I produce what is called fresh roast with nothing added, 100% fresh roast. We roast it the day we pick it and process it. The Galip company, they can process this anytime because they sun dry it initially. So sun drying has a different taste from fresh roast. Also, the other thing that I learned was not to overstock, because garlic is a perishable item if you do not store it correctly. And this was some of the technology that I got from ACI-AR, was how to store. And so in my business model, I had to think about a lot of what I learned and how to apply it. And that's why I said that it's taken me 8 years to work out my own business model that may be different from the Galip company. But we still share information. We've shared information up to a point where I think it is beneficial for everyone, largely because we haven't saturated the market yet. But all the technology from planting, how to plant and do an estuary, how to interplant with other crops, how to pick, how to process, how to clean and store, is all shared information for the public.
The facility that ACR created with NARI has produced a commercial relationship with a processor, but what Nora wants to see is a processing facility near Port Moresby to scale up both exports and retail sales of Galip nuts.
But there are other interests at a larger processing scale. Right now, the NARI facility, which we with NARI created as a test, so the project has a learning by doing methodology. We're asking questions about how do you do this by trying to do it, in effect. And we now have a commercial processor who's a toll processor using the facility, and it's a commercial relationship, and it's got some scale. I would really like to see it move to a whole nother level where maybe a joint venture or a public-private collaboration would actually build a purpose-built processing facility closer to Port Moresby so that we could expand the retailing and we could look at the export. And I think that although we don't have all the data, I'm pretty confident that the nut base would support a long-term endeavor of that scale. And I think that ultimately we need some investors, and that's where we need to go.
Nora wants to attract more food processors and partners in the business of making and selling agricultural products similar to galip nuts. Relationships they've had in the past with partners like New Guinea Organics.
We really need to, I think, we really need to attract food processors, people who are already in the business of things, and there are people like this in Papua New Guinea, spices and specialty foods and other agricultural products that have similarity to the galip nut. We're not there yet, Mike. I know where we want to go, and it's not entirely, this is not I'm a forest ecologist, it's not my expertise to really say how to build businesses, but we're connecting with people who know those things to try to attract the sort of activity and investment that I think we need. We've had that. We had a good partnership with New Guinea Organics before we lost Dennis Hill, and we've got some other partners who have existing businesses processing other products who I think will make potential partners to expand the galip industry.
Nora wants to continue to provide resources and research to part-time galip nut producers, as well as full-time ventures such as Dorothy's. But the larger goal eventually would be to provide a market for exporting nuts internationally, so those who just want to supply nuts can also make an income from it.
Well, to me, it would continue to be available to people at multiple levels. So it could continue to be available for someone who just needs a bit of, or wants a bit of extra money and has a little time and invests in harvesting galip and roasting it and selling it by the roadside. Like, I want to keep that end of the market stream for people who don't want a full-time job processing nuts, but want, an additional money earner that's accessible to them. So there would be those people, there would be the Dorothy scale people, and I think the part that we're missing is a larger commercial processor who would have a facility close to the market to rationalize the logistics, so ideally close to Port Moresby, who could help the country blaze that export trail so that people who just want to supply nuts have an outlet, so that there's a market that can absorb the potential supply, so that Papua New Guinea diversifies its agricultural activity, because you get economic resilience when you have diversity, and that's part of where we're headed.
In the interim, while PNG builds capacity to export nuts, Dorothy is working with ACR to develop a galip nut paste, which she believes holds a lot of promise as well.
We haven't sorted out the local industry to be able to ensure that we can do exporting, but I've decided that in the short term, there is a potential market for galip paste, and I have trialed galip paste for our own consumption. So right now I am working with ACIAR to produce a galip paste that will have maybe 5 different flavors, and it's going to take us 12 months to get to the end product, but that's what we're currently working on. So yes, the potential is very big. There's a lot of money that needs to be put into a lot of the research and the trials. My family, we are very small business. We are community orientated, but still we have put a lot of our own personal money into the ideas that we are generating ourselves. It's only on the technical side that we are going to ACIAR and asking them, for example, to help us with the testing of the quality of the product, the machine that we need to use. I have to be honest and say that recently they sent me a peanut butter making machine because I was using a blender to blend the galip, but the motor on it was too small. So we looked at the internet, and ACIAR, because this is still the research phase, they donated the peanut butter making machine to me. so that we can continue with the trials here in Papua New Guinea.
As mentioned earlier in the podcast, demand for nuts globally is growing, not just for the food that galip nuts or other nuts provide, but from the products that can be derived from their oils. And Nora sees potential for New Guinea to capitalize on this global demand.
We've done some research on the market, and it's phenomenal, the growth in the market around nuts in particular and natural foods more broadly. There's a huge demand, and I keep talking about nuts, but there are other products from galip, like the oil that can be pressed from the nuts. It's sort of like macadamia oil. It has applications in baked goods and also potentially in cosmetics and nutraceuticals. So there's heaps of opportunities. We need partners. We need commercial partners to develop those opportunities further. And I think they're pretty good. I mean, I'm not an economist, but what I see is that there's a lot of demand for the products and they can be profitably produced.
Dorothy was cautiously optimistic about the future of the galip nut industry, noting the large potential exporting the nut would have for the country, but she voiced concern over palm oil taking over customary lands and harming biodiversity and the ability for locals to use their land to make better wages for themselves than the palm oil industry would pay.
So in terms of biodiversity conservation, galip is a perfect tree to promote in terms of biodiversity conservation. It is local. It may be endemic to our region, but it is part of our existing ecosystem. So birds, for example, already are aware of galip and they eat it. It is a food for them. The plant also allows other plants to grow under it naturally. So if I were to have an opinion, I would say that if we can encourage more farmers to have a second crop, they will not second crop, meaning if they're already cacao farmers and we introduce galip and we have a strong galip industry that can export these particular nuts outside of Papua New Guinea, so we bring a lot more resources into the country, we will inevitably impact on the biodiversity of the region. That is a fact. Once we move to oil palm, I see us as cutting down more and more of our virgin forests and even our secondary forests. So cacao by now is no longer in forest areas, but the ecosystem of a cocoa farm, the way we farm it, is more natural because the farms are all, we have other trees in the farm. It's not a monocrop. Even though we are planting cacao or galip, they are not monocrops in our farms. We have many other trees that are growing. I'm not very confident, to be quite honest. I feel that if people like me do not step up and make an issue out of the situation, we most likely will lose a lot of our biodiversity and also our sustainable way of living. Living with galip, living with cacao, living with root crops is a more sustainable livelihood way for our people to live than being pushed off the land to make way for oil palm and being forced to work as laborers on huge tracts of land that have been taken up by foreign investors who have no sense of concern for the people, who are just willing to pay them 70 kina a fortnight or 100 kina, a month, and they expect them to live off that. Whereas if you are living on your own traditional land, you have your own cash crops, you can make more, you can have a better income, a better quality of life than what I am currently seeing happening at the moment.
Throughout this season of Mongabay Explores, focused on New Guinea, I've had the opportunity to examine the island's astonishing biodiversity. its emerging tourism sector, its history, politics, the impact of extractive industries upon customary lands, the precious biodiversity they contain, and the human lives they sustain, its charismatic megafauna like tree kangaroos, and burgeoning agricultural initiatives such as ACR's Galip Nut Project. It's an island at the crossroads of conservation. It has a chance to protect its mostly vast, untouched primary rainforest, rich cultural diversity, and develop the island in a way that preserves all of that, rather than extracting from or destroying it. There is truly no other place like New Guinea on Earth, and it can be difficult to say what about it stands out the most. However, there is one thing that many others who have been interviewed for this podcast say keeps them coming back and also fighting to save it.
It's the people. I mean, obviously, Papua New Guinea is a very diverse country, and there are many different, tribal divisions and ethnicities, but the country has a verve, there's a spirit. These are people that have energy, and they that's it. I mean, I'm a biologist, so I could tell you all about the fantastic natural diversity and the forest resources and the marine resources and so on, and that's all true. But the thing that for me really makes, when I think of PNG, I think of that incredible exuberance of these people, and that's what makes me want to go there.
I'd like to thank Dorothy and Nora for contributing to this episode. This is the final episode of the New Guinea season of Mongabay Explores. Make sure you are subscribed to Mongabay Explores wherever you get your podcasts, and don't miss our next season, to be released later this year. Please be sure to listen to our previous episodes in this season, which explore the island's vast biodiversity and history, carbon credit schemes, illegal logging, ecotourism, the birds of paradise, tree kangaroos, the Trans-Papua Highway, and the Tanamere Project. The podcast introduction and soundscape are from the Adalbert Mountains in Papua New Guinea. Credit to the communities of Musiamunat, Ivera, and Iwarame, the Nature Conservancy, and Zuzana Buravilova. Birds identified are listed in the show notes. Mongabay Explores is an ongoing podcast series diving into environmental stories from around the globe. If you enjoy this show, we ask that you please tell a friend. That's the best way to help expand our reach and keep growing. Don't forget to leave a review and let us know what you think. Special projects like this are made possible by our Patreon supporters, so please consider becoming a monthly sponsor via our Patreon page at patreon.com/Mongabay. Even just $1 per month will really help us offset the production costs and hosting fees. Keep up with all of Mongabay's news from Nature's Frontline at mongabay.com, or get updates via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and also TikTok, where our handle is @Mongabay. Thank you once again, and we'll be back with another season of Mongabay Explores.